The marble floors of Geneva's Grand Summit Hall gleamed beneath the weight of history. Delegates from every corner of the globe murmured in polished tones, sipping espresso and exchanging pleasantries. Cameras panned across the room, capturing the usual choreography of diplomacy, until the doors swung open. Ibrahim Traoré stepped in. No entouraje, no esmalte, just a single folder clutched in his left hand, marked in bold red ink. $500 billion debt reversal. The room fell silent. IMF officials stiffened. One leaned toward another, whispering, "Is this about the gold?" Traoré walked to the podium with the precision of a soldier and the fire of a man who'd seen too much. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't thank the hosts. He simply looked up and said, "For 50 years, they called it aid. I call it theft. And today, I demand the world pay up." Gasps rippled through the hall. A French delegate dropped his pen. A U.S. economist blinked rapidly, scanning his notes for a rebuttal that wouldn't come. Traoré opened the folder. Inside, a forensic audit of gold exports, IMF loan conditions, and a timeline of economic sabotage dressed as development. He held a high. This is not a request. It is a reckoning. The cameras zoomed in. Social feeds lit up. Hashtag debt reversal began trending before he'd even finished his sentence. And as the IMF's chief economist reached for his mic, visibly shaken, Traoré leaned forward and added, "You've built empires on our minerals. Now you'll return what you owe with interest." But what he revealed next would shake the foundations of global finance. Long before Ibrahim Traoré stood at that summit, the trap had already been set. In the aftermath of colonial rule, Africa was promised a new beginning, one paved with development loans, foreign investment, and economic guidance. But behind the polished promises lay a darker design. The International Monetary Fund, cloaked in legitimacy, offered structural adjustment programs to nations. Like Burkina Faso, the catch? Surrender control. Hospitals closed. Schools shuttered. Subsidies vanished. In exchange, gold flowed outward. Burkina Faso, rich in minerals, became a paradox. Billions in exports, yet millions in poverty. Foreign companies extracted gold by the ton, while local children dug barefoot in toxic pits. Their hands blistered, their futures stolen. And all the while, executives toasted profits in Davos, sipping champagne under chandeliers made from the very wealth they'd siphoned. The IMF called it stabilization. Ibrahim called it sabotage. For decades, leaders were pressured to comply. Speak out, and aid vanished. Resist, and sanctions followed. The trap wasn't just economic, it was psychological. A generation grew up believing they were poor, when in truth, they were plundered. And the numbers were staggering. Between 1970 and 2020, Burkina Faso exported over $200 billion in gold. Its debt ballooned. Infrastructure crumbled. The people suffered. But Ibrahim had done his homework. He traced every loan, every clause, every ounce of gold. What he found wasn't just injustice. It was a system designed to keep Africa dependent, silent, and exploited. Most people have no idea how deep this trap goes. They see the headlines, not the handcuffs. But Ibrahim was about to expose it all. And as the summit's tension thickened, one question lingered in every mind. If this young leader could prove the theft, what would the world owe Africa? The answer was coming, and it would not be small. They wore tailored suits and spoke in measured tones. Their press releases promised growth, stability, and partnership. But behind the glass walls of IMF headquarters, the language was different, clinical, calculated, and cold. In one leaked memo from 1983, an economist wrote, "Burkina Faso's gold output is promising. Recommend conditional lending to ensure resource alignment." Resource alignment, a euphemism for control. The IMF didn't invade nations. It didn't need to. It offered lifelines with barb hooks, loans tied to austerity, reforms that gutted public services, and contracts that handed mineral rights to foreign firms, all under the banner of development. In archival footage, African leaders sat across from IMF officials, nodding solemnly as terms were dictated. Not negotiated, dictated. There were no African economists in the room. No cultural advisors. Just spreadsheets, projections, and a quiet assumption. They need us. The arrogance was cloaked in diplomacy. When Burkina Faso resisted a loan condition in 1991, the IMF responded by suspending disbursements. Hospitals closed. Teachers went unpaid. The message was clear: comply or collapse. And yet, the IMF's annual reports painted a different picture. Smiling children on the cover. Buzzwords like inclusive growth and poverty reduction. Inside, the numbers told another story. Rising debt, falling wages, and gold exports that soared while local hunger deepened. Executives toasted their success in boardrooms. "We've stabilized the region," one said in a fictionalized scene, swirling a glass of scotch. Now let's talk lithium. Not a word about the children mining gold with bare hands. Not a thought for the families displaced by foreign-owned operations. Exploitation was masked as assistance. Aid packages came with strings that strangled. Technical advisors rewrote national budgets, slashing health and education to meet repayment schedules. And when protests erupted, the IMF issued statements of concern, never accountability. Cold indifference to suffering became policy. In 2005, Burkina Faso's debt reached $1.9 billion. Yet it had exported over $40 billion in gold since independence. The math didn't add up, unless the goal was never development, but dependency. And still, the machine rolled on. New programs, new conditions, new promises, always the same result. But the IMF didn't expect a 35-year-old soldier to rewrite the rules. Before the summit, before the folder, before the fire in his voice, there was a boy named Ibrahim. He grew up in the dusty outskirts of Ouagadougou, where the sun baked the earth and dreams were often buried beneath it. His mother, Miriam, was a quiet force. She worked the land, raised her children, and once a month walked miles to trade gold flakes for food. Not gold bars, not coins, flakes scraped from the edges of a mine her husband died in. One afternoon, Ibrahim watched her kneel beside a foreign trader's truck. She held out a pouch of gold dust. The man waited, nodded, and tossed her a few crumpled bills. Behind him, trucks loaded with gold roared past, headed for ports, for Europe, for vaults Ibrahim would never see. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stared at the dust cloud trailing the convoy, and something inside him hardened. Years later, he joined the military, not for power, but for discipline. He rose quickly, not because he was ruthless, but because he was incorruptible. Officers tried to sway him with perks, promotions, foreign trips. He declined them all. "I serve the soil I was born on," he once said, "not the hands that try to buy it." His loyalty wasn't loud, it was lived. When protests erupted over mining contracts, Ibrahim stood with the people. When foreign firms threatened to pull out, he called their bluff. And when whispers of a coup began, he didn't flinch. He let it. But power didn't change him. He refused luxury cars. He banned ministers from flying first class. He walked through villages without cameras, listening to the same stories he'd lived as a boy. Calm under pressure, fierce for justice, unshakable in truth. And when he finally got the mic, he didn't hold back. The summit moderator cleared his throat, gesturing toward the IMF representative seated beneath a banner that read, "Global Partnership for Progress." The man adjusted his tie, leaned into the mic, and began. For decades, the IMF has stood with developing nations. We've provided technical assistance, stabilized economies, and promoted inclusive growth. Burkina Faso has been a valued partner in this journey. A few polite nods followed. Cameras clicked. Ibrahim didn't move. The IMF rep continued, voice rising with rehearsed conviction. "Our programs have reduced inflation, improved fiscal discipline, and laid the groundwork for long-term prosperity. The data speaks for itself." Ibrahim leaned forward, his voice calm but cutting. "Let's talk about data." The room shifted. Heads turned. In 2022 alone, Ibrahim said, Burkina Faso exported $4.2 billion in gold. Yet our national budget was $2 billion. Half of what we gave away. And still, we borrowed from you. The IMF rep blinked. Well, mineral exports are subject to market fluctuations. No, IbrahimTraoré. They're subject to contracts you helped write. Contracts that exempt foreign firms from taxes. Contracts that leave our people digging in poison while your analysts write glowing reports. A murmur rippled through the crowd. A journalist whispered, "He's not holding back." The IMF rep shifted in his seat. "We've always operated within international norms. Norms IbrahimTraoré. Like demanding we cut healthcare to meet repayment schedules? Like forcing us to privatize water while your companies profit." The moderator tried to interject. Ibrahim raised a hand. "You speak of partnership, but in every negotiation, we were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. You call it assistance. We call it extraction." The IMF rep's face flushed. He reached for his notes, fumbling. Ibrahim remained composed, eyes steady. "You've built a system where poverty is profitable, where our suffering funds your stability." The room fell silent. And then Ibrahim reached into his folder and pulled out a document no one saw coming. Ibrahim held the document aloft, letting the silence stretch. The room, moments ago filled with diplomatic chatter, now pulsed with tension. Every eye was locked on the folder. Every breath held. "This," he said, voice steady, "is a forensic audit. 50 years. 50 years of gold extraction. 50 years of theft disguised as partnership." He opened the folder slowly, deliberately. Pages thick with data, maps, signatures, and contracts. We traced every ounce, every shipment, every clause, every loophole. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Burkina Faso has exported over $500 billion in gold since independence. And yet, we remain in debt. Our hospitals are underfunded. Our schools overcrowded. Our people digging in the dirt while foreign firms fly private. The IMF representative shifted in his seat, eyes darting to aides who offered no lifeline. Ibrahim continued, "You called it stabilization. We call it strangulation. You called it aid. We call it arithmetic fraud." He paused, letting the words settle. "We demand repayment. Not just the $500 billion you extracted, but interest, reparations, restoration." The moderator's mouth opened, then closed. No one dared interrupt. Ibrahim turned a page. "Here are the contracts, signed under duress, brokered by unelected consultants, written in languages our ministers couldn't read." Another page. "Here are the tax exemptions, foreign companies paying 0%, while our children pay with their lungs." Another page. "Here are the IMF memos, suggesting we cut education to meet repayment schedules, while gold shipments doubled." The IMF rep leaned into his mic, voice cracking. "These figures are speculative. We've always operated within international norms." Ibrahim didn't flinch. "Norms written by you, enforced by you, benefiting you." He stepped back from the podium, letting the audit speak for itself. The cameras zoomed in. The crowd leaned forward. And then the world erupted. On TikTok, African youth posted reaction videos, tears, cheers, dances. "He said what we've all felt," one caption read. Finally, someone stood up. On Twitter, #GoldJustice trended within minutes. Celebrities reposted clips of Ibrahim's speech. A Grammy-winning artist tweeted, "This is the energy we need. Truth, fire, dignity." In Nairobi, students gathered in auditoriums to watch the replay. In Accra, murals of Ibrahim began appearing overnight. In Paris, protesters held signs reading "Return the Gold." The IMF issued a statement. "We are reviewing the claims and remain committed to equitable development." It was too late. The narrative had shifted. Ibrahim wasn't just a president. He was a symbol. And just when the IMF thought it couldn't get worse, Ibrahim named names. He turned to the final page of the audit. "These are the firms," he said. "The ones who profited, the ones who lobbied, the ones who wrote the rules and broke our backs." He read them aloud, one by one. Mining giants, consulting firms, lobby groups. Some gasps turned to murmurs. Some murmurs to outrage. "These are the people," he said, "who must answer. Not just to Burkina Faso, but to history." The room was no longer silent. It was electric. And Ibrahim? He stood calm, unshaken, a storm in stillness. The summit ended, but the tremors had only begun. Within hours, African finance ministers convened emergency meetings. In Ghana, a task force was formed to audit mineral exports. In Zambia, Parliament demanded transparency on foreign mining contracts. And in Mali, a bold declaration: we will no longer trade dignity for debt. Burkina Faso's stance had ignited a continent-wide reckoning. Mining companies scrambled. Emails flew. Legal teams drafted statements. Several contracts were suspended pending review. One multinational firm saw its stock plummet 18% overnight. Investors panicked. Activists celebrated. Global media split down the middle. Western outlets called Ibrahim's speech provocative, unprecedented, a populist gamble. African outlets called it historic, liberating, the beginning of economic justice. Editorials clashed. Comment sections exploded. On Twitter, the fire spread. Hashtag #GoldJustice surged past 1 million mentions. Clips of Ibrahim's speech were remixed into music videos, protest chants, and spoken-word poetry. One post read, "He didn't just speak for Burkina Faso. He spoke for every nation ever told to stay silent." The African diaspora rallied. In London, demonstrators marched with signs reading "Return Our Wealth." In Toronto, students held teach-ins on IMF history. In New York, murals of Ibrahim appeared on subway walls, painted by artists who'd never set foot in Africa but felt the pulse of his message. Celebrities joined in. A Nigerian-American actor posted, "This is the kind of leadership we dream of." A South African singer released a track titled "Reversal," sampling Ibrahim's voice. Even athletes wore gold-colored wristbands in solidarity. The IMF, caught off guard, issued a vague statement. "We acknowledge the concerns raised and remain committed to inclusive dialogue." It landed with a thud. No apology, no accountability, just silence wrapped in bureaucracy. But silence was no longer an option. In classrooms, children asked why their textbooks never mentioned this. In boardrooms, executives whispered about reputational risk. In villages, elders nodded quietly, saying it's about time. And Ibrahim? He didn't retreat. He didn't soften. He prepared his final address. Because this wasn't just about gold. It wasn't just about debt. It was about rewriting the story of a continent long spoken for, but never heard. But Ibrahim wasn't done yet. His final words would echo across continents. The final address was not scheduled. It wasn't on the agenda. But after the audit, the confrontation, and the naming of names, the summit organizers had no choice. The world wanted to hear more. Ibrahim stepped back to the podium, not with fury, but with clarity. The fire in his voice had not dimmed, but it had deepened. This was no longer about numbers. It was about narrative. "This is not revenge," he began. "It is restoration." He paused, letting the weight of the word settle. Restoration, of dignity, of truth, of history. "For too long," he continued, "we've been told who we are by those who never asked. We've been labeled poor, unstable, corrupt. But we are not poor. We are plundered." The room stirred. Delegates shifted in their seats. Some nodded. Others looked down. "We are not unstable. We are destabilized. We are not corrupt. We are corrupted by systems designed to extract, not empower." He looked out over the crowd, eyes scanning the faces of those who had once dismissed him as a young soldier with too much fire and not enough finesse. "You speak of global order," he said. "But order built on theft is not order. It's oppression. And justice is not a favor. It's overdue." The crescendo was rising, not in volume, but in truth. "We do not seek pity. We do not seek charity. We seek sovereignty, the right to define our own future, to write our own story, to mine our own gold and invest it in our own children." He turned toward the African delegates. "We must stop asking for seats at tables built to exclude us. We must build our own tables. Tables where truth is currency and dignity is policy." The applause began, not polite but powerful, not diplomatic but defiant. Ibrahim continued, "To the youth watching this, you are not the aftermath of colonialism. You are the architects of restoration. Your identity is not a burden. It is a blueprint. He gestured to the folder once more. This audit is not just a document. It is a mirror held up to the world, reflecting what it refused to see. He closed the folder. And now we see, and we will not unsee. The cameras captured every word. The live stream surged. In homes across Africa, families watched in silence, then in tears, then in pride. In the diaspora, messages poured in, "I've never felt so seen. This is the speech my grandfather waited his whole life for." Ibrahim didn't just speak, he restored. And as the summit ended, one thing was clear. The world would never look at Africa the same way again. They called it aid. He called it theft. And with one folder, one voice, and one unshakable truth, Ibrahim Traoré shattered a 50-year illusion. The $500 billion gold trap wasn't just exposed, it was reversed. Not by force, but by facts. Not with vengeance, but with vision. This wasn't a speech. It was a reckoning. Because when a continent stands up, when a leader speaks not just for his nation, but for generations silenced by debt and diplomacy, the world listens. And when the truth is this clear, this raw, this undeniable, there's no going back. Ibrahim didn't just demand repayment. He demanded respect. He didn't just name the theft. He named the thieves. And in doing so, he gave voice to every child who mined gold barefoot, every mother who traded dignity for survival, every nation told to be grateful for its own exploitation. This is the moment history pivots. So if you felt something, share this story. If you believe in truth, subscribe for more. If you carry pride in your roots, your people, your fight, be part of this movement. Because dignity is louder than death, and justice, once spoken, cannot be silenced.